Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When orange flags pierced his land like plastic weeds, he knew something was wrong. A forged map, a shattered gate, and a war over dirt no one had the right to claim. This wasn't just a fight against an HOA. It was a battle for sovereignty, grit, and the soul of the American West. When you've spent years walking the same land every morning, you start to notice the smallest things. A bent fence post, the direction hoofprints shift after a night of wind, the faint scent of coyotes down by the ravine. So when I saw those bright orange flags stabbed into the soil like plastic weeds along the ridge, I stopped dead in my tracks. They weren't mine. I don't use plastic. I map terrain by hand, the old-fashioned way, with a compass and a notebook, not dollar store landscaping markers. I crouched near the closest flag, squinting under the brim of my hat. The dirt was loose, freshly disturbed, and the stake had been driven in with a mallet, not by weather or chance. There were more of them, stretching along the dry channel like some idiot's idea of a trail. I counted 13, all perfectly spaced. They zigzagged down through the slope behind my barn where the cattle never tread. That meant someone had come in deliberately, someone who knew what they were doing, or thought they did. And then I saw the tire tracks. Fresh, wide, deep treads, likely from an all-wheel drive SUV or a lifted pickup. They cut straight across my southern boundary, up from the main road and through the rear gate. The bastard had popped the padlock clean off. I found it half buried in the dirt, shorn metal edge still shiny. That lock had held since I welded it on 6 years ago. It got worse. Taped to one of the orange stakes was a piece of weatherproof cardstock with a note, handwritten in a smug scrawl that nearly made my blood boil. HOA inspection. Violation identified. Unauthorized shed structure. Correction required within 14 days. The hell it was. I stood there a moment, wind tugging at my jacket, trying to decide if this was some kind of prank. But no prankster would haul themselves over 3 miles of rough land, cut a commercial lock, leave coordinated markers, and write up a violation notice like they were running the goddamn county. No, this was organized and stupid. I walked back to the shed in question, my old tin-roofed lean-to behind the barn where I stored fencing tools and dried hay. It had stood there since I built it with my brother in 2012, on land I bought in full, titled in my name, registered with the Nevada Land Office, and validated by 3 decades of property line surveys. This place was mine. Every acre, all 850 of them. By the time I got back to the house, my boots were coated in red dust and frustration. I dug out my field journal, a fresh roll of topo grid paper, and that battered Nikon I kept for trail monitoring. I started marking out the coordinates, every flag, every tire track, every unnatural disruption. The ridge had always been quiet. The last neighbor was a hermit who died 10 years back, and since then, it had just been me, the cattle, and the wind. Until a few years ago, that's when the new subdivision popped up to the northwest, Silver Bluff Ridge. I'd watched the bulldozers come in from a lawn chair with a beer, figuring it'd be a plague of yapping dogs and screaming kids I'd never hear from this far out. But these people had money and rules, and their own shiny HOA. From a distance, it looked like a parking lot of identical beige Lego houses. I'd never had contact with them, and never wanted any. But someone from their camp had made contact now. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, coffee going cold as I examined the pictures I'd taken. The flags lined up in a suspiciously geometric way, too clean, too intentional. I traced them on the grid, notating elevations, then shaded the southern perimeter where the gate had been broken. Something about it all screamed reconnaissance. The kicker, whoever did this hadn't even bothered to contact me. No knock, no mail, just stealth, trespass, and a cheap-ass violation note on my land. I thumbed through my old survey maps, double-checking my legal boundaries, verifying every inch. No overlaps, no easements, no damned HOA jurisdiction anywhere near me. I stapled the violation note to the wall above my desk, beside the 308 I kept cleaned and sighted in. Then I rolled out a fresh sheet and started sketching. Topographical gradients, fence lines, elevation shift, flag positions. I drew slow, deliberate strokes, the same way I did in the Army when mapping unknown hills under a black sky. I wasn't paranoid, I was preparing. And this wasn't over. About a week after I found those flags and sent photos to the county land office, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox, sealed with a blue HOA emblem and smelling like printer toner and ego. It had that suburban smugness baked into it. Calligraphy font, glossy return address, the kind of envelope that thinks it owns you before you even open it. Inside was a 3-page letter from the Silver Bluff Ridge Homeowners Association, complete with a stamped final notice header that made me laugh out loud. According to them, my ranch, my 850 acres of high desert pasture and pine scrub, had been recently integrated into the HOA's updated jurisdiction under Phase 4 Expansion Authority. Translation: some desk jockey with a ruler decided they could redraw a map and annex my land like it was an abandoned sandbox. The letter informed me that I was now required to submit a formal application for membership, provide full access to structures and enclosures for inspection, and pay a $4,000 initiation assessment, plus ongoing dues. It even included a demand for 3 sets of keys to every outbuilding and gated section on the property. The audacity would have been impressive if it weren't so asinine. They also included a grainy black and white map. Looked like it had been scanned through a toaster. It had bold marker lines that clearly showed a boundary slicing through my land, like someone had used a ruler and no brain cells. They'd labeled my equipment shed as a community utility barn. My root cellar was HOA shared emergency storage. Hell, they even tagged my septic field as a protected drainage ecosystem. I stared at that page a long time, then slowly tore the map out and pinned it next to the fake violation notice. The wall was starting to look like a hunter's warboard. Later that day, I drove into Carson City and marched straight into the county assessor's office. The clerk at the desk, a woman named Terry who I'd known from livestock permit renewals, barely glanced up when I dropped the envelope onto the counter. Silver Bluff Ridge, I said. Apparently, I now serve under them like a vassal peasant. Terry pushed her glasses up. Oh, hell. Did they hit you with one of those Phase 4 packages? Hit me. They tried to annex my barn. She leafed through the pages, then opened up the digital parcel viewer. I gave her my track number, section details, and survey coordinates. Within seconds, she had the official county cadastral overlay on screen. My land sat well outside the HOA's recognized perimeter by over 1.5 miles. That's not even close, she muttered. Nope. She brought up the HOA submitted boundary expansion map. And there it was. A hand-edited PDF, laughably amateur with red lines drawn in a way that completely ignored zoning lines, recorded easements, and even topography. It looked like a kid's treasure map. Terry pointed to a signature box. Karen Schelling, president of HOA, claimed this was submitted with owner cooperation. You didn't sign anything, right? I almost choked on my coffee. Lady, if I ever cooperate with something called Silver Bluff Ridge, shoot me. She shook her head, printing out everything. We're flagging this. It's not just nonsense. It's potentially a fraudulent boundary claim. Want to file a formal objection? Already halfway written. From the assessor's office, I headed down to the archives to grab microfiche copies of my original property plat and deed filings. The guy working there was some kid with a lanyard and a caffeine addiction, but he helped me get the scans I needed. I walked out of there with a thick folder of every document proving, beyond any doubt, that my land had never been, and never could be, under HOA jurisdiction. And just to make damn sure, I took a drive around the edges of Silver Bluff Ridge. Their homes all looked like they'd been cloned from the same Pinterest board. Vinyl siding, faux shutters, little plastic mailboxes shaped like birds. There was a big central office, which looked more like a dentist's lobby than a governance center. I drove by slow enough to see the name Karen Schelling on the reserved parking space right in front. She hadn't even tried to hide her role in this. Back home, I spread everything out on my kitchen table. Their fake documents on one side, my certified ones on the other. It was almost poetic how poorly they lined up. Their expansion map even mislabeled a stream bed that dried up in the 90s. At least, if you're going to forge a map, do your homework. I grabbed a red pen, circled every contradiction I could find, and started building a new chart. Dates, signatures, GPS coordinates, statements from land registry, all logged. I wasn't just documenting anymore. I was building a file to hand to a lawyer or a judge. I didn't hear anything from them for a few days after that, but I knew it wasn't over. These people didn't back off. They relied on intimidation, apathy, and paperwork fatigue. Too bad for them I had time, discipline, and a drawer full of field notebooks. The thing about people like Karen Schelling is they never come at you head on. No, they try to box you in with process, paperwork, and assumption. They think silence is consent and bureaucracy is a weapon. I decided it was time I reminded them what a real inspection looks like. I didn't wait for another letter or threat. 2 days after confirming the fraudulent map, I loaded my Silverado with every piece of documentation I had: copies of the county plat, archived deeds, my hand-drawn survey overlays, and high-res prints of the tire tracks and violation notes. I even brought the old Nikon camera and that busted padlock from the south gate, just in case anyone questioned the definition of forced entry. HOA's office was tucked into the front of the Silver Bluff Ridge subdivision, right between a juice bar and a Pilates studio. Their parking lot had those smug little signs: HOA members only. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed. I parked right under one. Inside, the place looked like a realtor's dream and a civil servant's nightmare. Vinyl chairs, fake plants, and a receptionist who looked up at me like I'd just tracked manure across her parquet floor. I introduced myself, handed over my ID, and said I needed to speak with Karen Schelling immediately. "She's in a meeting," the woman said without blinking. "I'll wait." "She's booked all day." "Good. Gives me time to review her crimes." That got her attention. I pulled out my folder, set it on the reception desk with a satisfying thump, and opened it to the forged expansion map. I pointed to the red lines and then to my original deed copy. "This is called felony misrepresentation, title fraud. You know what this is?" Her face went pale. "She submitted this to the county claiming I agreed to be part of your little fantasy subdivision. I didn't. I have never signed anything under HOA jurisdiction. My land is sovereign. You understand what that means, ma'am? You're trespassing on a legal level." She asked me to leave. I told her I'd be happy to, as soon as she took this folder to Karen and advised her to prepare for formal charges. I left it right there on the desk, labeled, organized, time-stamped, and indexed. By the time I got to the DA's office, I had already printed out my written complaint. The assistant district attorney, a guy named Morales, heard me out for 20 minutes while flipping through the photos and handwritten notes. When I got to the part where they'd labeled my barn as a community utility building, he actually laughed. Then he stopped laughing and asked, "Wait, they physically entered your land?" "Cut a steel lock, left inspection markers, took photos, I'm guessing. I've got flag positions and tire track directionals mapped by hand." "You mapped it?" "I used to teach reconnaissance cartography to Army scouts." He nodded like he suddenly understood I wasn't the average landowner who'd just roll over and call a real estate lawyer. Morales told me they'd open a preliminary review under illegal annexation and potential title tampering, and requested I send over digital copies of everything. I went back to the ranch that evening with a tight calm in my chest. This was going somewhere now. Real wheels turning, but I wasn't taking chances. I spent the next morning walking my perimeter, especially the south gate. The lock was still off, so I replaced it with a stronger one, steel core, tamper-proof. Then I built a basic tire trap just off the access point. Nothing lethal, just a flatboard under gravel with roofing nails through it. If anyone tried to drive in again, they'd be limping back out. I posted new signs. Private property, entry by permission only. Trespassers will be documented and prosecuted. I wrote them myself, stenciled them clean, bolted them into steel posts every 100 yards. Then I rolled out my paper again, sketched the traps, the new signs, and dated everything. It wasn't just evidence, it was discipline. Every step recorded, every move calculated. I wasn't just protecting my land. I was constructing a defensive perimeter, legal and physical. That night, I sat on the porch, rifle across my lap, a thermos of black coffee by my side. I didn't know if they'd be stupid enough to come back again. But if they did, they wouldn't find some passive farmer confused about jurisdiction. They'd find me waiting. The night they came back, I was ready. It started with the coyotes going quiet. That's always the first sign something unnatural's moving through the land. No howls, no rustling, just a low silence thick enough to chew on. I stepped out onto the porch, letting the door ease shut behind me. I didn't turn on the floodlight. Instead, I clipped my old flashlight to my vest and adjusted the strap on my Winchester. Not loaded, not yet, but it hung across my back like a promise. I didn't need night vision. I knew my land better than I knew most people. The moon was near full, throwing silver across the ridge. Down in the gully, movement caught my eye. 3 shadows ducking low, pushing through the brush. 2 men and a woman. The lead figure had that twitchy, self-important posture I'd seen before, from a safe distance, during HOA meetings on YouTube or city council footage. Karen Schelling. Even at night, she wore that oversized visor like she was at a charity golf tournament. The other two were just shapes behind her, probably board members or the kind of retired men who got bored enough to volunteer for power. They thought they were clever, leaving their car stashed in the mesquite half a mile up and hiking in. What they didn't count on was the fact that I could hear a gopher blink from inside the barn. They made it past the first marker, stepped over the tire trap like they'd seen it before. I watched them squinting at the barn, pointing to the roofline, measuring something with a laser tape. One of the men started snapping photos on a phone. I whistled. One sharp note. Karen spun around so fast she almost dropped her clipboard. "Evening," I called out. "You folks need a map." Karen recovered faster than I expected. She stomped forward like she was about to chew out a hotel receptionist. "You're obstructing an official assessment." I flicked on the flashlight. The beam cut across her face, then settled on the laminated badge she wore on a lanyard. "This isn't official," I said. "This is trespassing. You're 300 yards inside private property." "That's not an estimate. I've got it logged." One of the men tried to chime in. "This land is under HOA review as of—" "Shut up," I said, flat. "There is no such authority. You're on sovereign land that's never been, and will never be, under HOA jurisdiction." Karen started yelling, something about pending county annexation and emergency code enforcement powers. I ignored her. I'd already hit the call button on my satellite phone. Dispatch connected. I gave my name, coordinates, and description of the intruders, told them no weapons had been raised, but that I was armed and standing ground. Karen heard that and took it as a cue to escalate. She marched straight up to me, jabbing a finger in my chest. "You think this intimidation will stop the community from claiming what's rightfully theirs?" She hissed. "You're squatting on community land." I stared at her like she'd just declared war on a mountain. "This land was bought in 1996, paid in full, recorded in Washoe County. There's a state-stamped deed in my safe older than your whole subdivision." That's when she made her mistake. She shoved me. It wasn't a full-blown assault, more like a push to show dominance, but it was enough. One of her cronies tried to step in between us, arms up, but I already had my phone up and was recording. Audio, video, GPS logged. "You just laid hands on a landowner while trespassing during an ongoing investigation," I said. "You just made this criminal." Karen looked like she'd swallowed a pine cone. The sheriff's deputy showed up fast. Faster than expected, probably because I'd logged prior complaints. The moment headlights touched the brush, I stepped back and lowered the flashlight. I didn't need drama. I just needed proof. The deputy, Officer Morelli, was a no-nonsense type with desert boots and a deep sigh already forming. He looked at the trio, looked at me, then at the barn. "You again," he muttered to Karen. Karen launched into her monologue. How I was squatting, how the HOA had extended jurisdiction, how the barn was unpermitted. Morelli listened for about 6 seconds, then turned to me. "You got documentation?" I handed him the folder. It had a printed copy of the expansion map they'd forged, my notarized deed, GPS printouts, and the audio transcript from our last run-in. Morelli thumbed through it, nodded, then turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he said. "You and your companions are under temporary detainment for criminal trespass, pending confirmation with the DA." "What? No. I'm the president of—" "I don't care if you're the president of the moon," he said, already pulling out zip cuffs. "This ain't your land." They tried to protest. Karen threatened lawsuits, media, council members, whatever else she had in her bag of tricks. It didn't work. They were cuffed and escorted back to the cruiser. Before they were loaded in, I walked up to Morelli and handed him a flash drive. "This has the video, audio, GPS logs, and time codes," I said. "Also flag the timestamp where she made physical contact." He nodded. "That'll help the prosecutor. You've been thorough. That's kind of my thing." I stood there for a while after they drove off. The air was still cold, but the land felt steadier now, like it was waiting for what came next. So was I. The ranch was quiet for a couple of days after the arrest. Too quiet. I spent most of that time mending the fence line and reinforcing the southern gate where the last intrusion happened. Not because I thought they'd be back on foot. No, Karen wasn't the type to hike more than 100 yards without a golf cart and an audience, but because I knew better than to assume one arrest would scare them off. And I was right. It started with a knock on the door just after lunch. A man in a navy blazer and khakis, hair slicked like he'd just walked out of a budget courtroom drama, stood on my porch holding a leather portfolio and an oily smile. "Mr. Martell," he asked, pronouncing it wrong. "That's me. My name's Lyle Densmore. I represent the Silver Bluff Ridge Homeowners Association. I'd like to deliver a formal notice and discuss options for mediation." Would you like to do that before or after I call the sheriff again? He blinked, but didn't flinch. There's no need for that. I'm here in a professional capacity. I opened the screen door slowly and took the papers from him. You're serving me. No. This is an invitation to settle jurisdictional ambiguities. Our client, Ms. Schelling, has submitted clarifying documents that demonstrate your client's in jail for criminal trespass. Lyle cleared his throat. Pending charges. I flipped through the packet. It was a reworked version of the same garbage they'd tried before, but this time with new buzzwords. Provisional community overlay. Retroactive annexation authority. My favorite was presumptive compliance based on contiguity. Contiguity, I said. You people think adjacency gives you rights. Mr. Martell, he said, exasperated. I'm trying to avoid litigation. Surely you can understand that cooperation is... Nope. I handed the packet back to him. This is fraud with a font upgrade. Get off my porch. He hesitated, like maybe he thought he could charm me into a signature. I took one step forward, looked him dead in the eye, and said, You're standing on private land. That makes you trespassing. Next time you show up here without a warrant or an invitation, you'll leave in the back of a cruiser. He left, muttering about how this could have been handled amicably. I'd seen how they handled things amicably. That evening, I drove into town to meet with Morales at the DA's office. He was already neck-deep in paperwork from the investigation, and I brought more. Photographic timelines, the altered expansion maps, and, most importantly, a voice memo I'd received anonymously on a prepaid burner I kept in the barn for emergencies. The voice was male, nervous, and fast. Hey, I used to work admin for the HOA. I saw what Karen did. She forged map overlays and submitted them to the county without full board approval. She said the ranch was unincorporated so she could grab it and retroactively absorb it to boost property value stats. She's done this before, tried with a greenbelt 2 years ago. I played it for Morales, who just sat there, eyebrows raised. She ever succeed with that greenbelt? I asked. Nope, but the difference is you fought back. Most folks just cave and hire a lawyer who settles in arbitration. You made this criminal. Good, I said. The next day, things kicked up a notch. I got a notice from the county clerk's office that my property file had been flagged for review. Attached was a request from a planning consultant claiming the land was in dispute. The name? One of the board members who'd been arrested with Karen. They were trying to backdoor a zoning audit while she was still sitting in a cell. I spent the next 4 hours down at the registrar's office, meeting with a real-deal property auditor who seemed more annoyed than concerned. They're filing procedural noise, he said, trying to generate enough bureaucratic smoke that you lose track of the fire. Not happening. I filed an emergency motion through Morales to freeze any HOA-related filings connected to my land until the criminal investigation was complete. He agreed. A judge signed the order 2 hours later. I didn't stop there. I drove back to Silver Bluff Ridge and parked right outside their community center. That same sign was still up. Karen Schelling, HOA president. I stared at it a long time, then took out a piece of paper and taped it right beneath. Under state investigation. Proceed at your own legal risk. I stayed just long enough to see 2 board members come outside and tear it down like I'd slapped them in the face. Good. Back at the ranch, I started upgrading the defense. Not with barbed wire or floodlights, but with documentation. Every trail, every gate, every structure got a laminated tag with the original build date and survey coordinates. I printed new signs that said, No HOA jurisdiction, private sovereign land. I even mailed copies to the county office to timestamp the installation. You want to claim a barn? Then you better be ready to explain why the guy who built it still owns the blueprints, the nails, and the damn dirt it stands on. I got the call on a Thursday morning. Morales' voice was calm, measured, but I could hear the weight in it. We're filing charges, he said. Full indictment, 3 counts. I didn't say anything at first, just watched the steam rise off my coffee. I knew it was coming, but hearing it out loud felt like the hammer finally hitting the nail. Criminal trespass, fraudulent filing of property documents, and attempted coercion. Karen Schelling is going to court. I let that settle in my chest a moment before I answered. Good. Morales told me to be in court the next week for the preliminary hearing. I was listed as the primary complainant and material witness. Said I didn't have to come dressed up, just clean and clear. But I dressed up anyway. When I walked into the Washoe County Courthouse, I looked more like a contractor than a rancher, Pressed denim button-up, boots clean but not polished. I wanted them to see I took this seriously, but that I was still who I was. Not some HOA pawn, not some scared civilian, just a man defending what was his. Karen was already there, sitting beside her lawyer, some gray-haired guy who looked like he hadn't had a real case since the Clinton years. She looked haggard but defiant, her blazer too stiff, her hair done up like she was running for something. The judge reviewed the motions quickly. The prosecutor laid out the basics. Karen had filed falsified jurisdictional maps to the county without authority, trespassed onto private property while impersonating an enforcement officer, and attempted to coerce the landowner into surrendering property rights under false pretense. Her lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding born of procedural optimism. "Optimism doesn't cut padlocks," I muttered. The judge didn't laugh, but I saw his lip twitch. Then it was my turn. I stepped up to the stand, took the oath, and answered every question they threw at me. I walked them through the maps, the boundary lines, the fake notices, the night Karen and her HOA cronies crept onto my land with tape measures like it was a goddamn Halloween stunt. I explained the trap I laid, not to hurt them, but to track them. The signs, the photos, the GPS logs, the voice memos. The judge asked me one question directly. Why didn't you just ignore the HOA? Because the second you ignore people like this, they start thinking you're consenting. And next thing you know, you're paying dues to use your own bathroom. I left the courtroom that day to a couple of local news vans waiting outside. Apparently, someone on the county board had leaked the case. One guy shoved a mic in my face and asked, "Are you anti-HOA, Mr. Martell?" I shook my head. I'm anti-stupid. If they stayed on their side of the fence, we'd never be here. By the end of the week, Karen was officially indicted, along with the 2 board members who'd followed her into my property. They posted bail, her with money, the others with their houses as collateral. That's when things got messy. HOA Silver Bluff Ridge's insurance carrier dropped them. Turns out attempted land annexation wasn't covered under their liability clause. The subdivision's main developer issued a press release distancing himself entirely, claiming rogue board behavior. And the real kicker, a few residents reached out to me through Morales, anonymous at first. Turns out they'd been strong-armed by Karen too, fined for minor infractions, pressured to conform, told their complaints would go missing. Now they were willing to testify. Morales called it a pattern, a case of abuse of power under the guise of neighborhood regulation. He expanded the investigation. Meanwhile, the HOA tried one last Hail Mary. Their attorneys filed a countersuit against me, civil, not criminal, claiming I'd threatened board members and impeded civic functions. Said I'd made them fear for their safety. I laughed when I read it. "You're going to need a better fairy tale," I told Morales. He agreed and filed a motion to strike the civil case as retaliatory litigation. The judge sided with him. Then came the freeze. The court issued a temporary injunction against the HOA, blocking any attempts to claim land, enforce dues, or file administrative paperwork involving Silver Bluff Ridge or adjacent parcels. They were dead in the water. And I wasn't done yet. Courtroom number 2 was packed tighter than a feedlot during drought season. Local news crews had taken up half the gallery. The other half was made up of Silver Bluff Ridge residents, some curious, some bitter, some clearly terrified they'd backed the wrong horse. Karen sat at the defense table like a marble statue, expression frozen into that tight-jawed defiance she probably practiced in the mirror. Her 2 former board members looked less certain, sweaty, nervous, the kind of guys who never expected their weekend hobby of HOA power tripping would land them in real legal fire. The trial had finally begun. It opened with the prosecution laying out their core argument that Karen Schelling, acting as president of Silver Bluff Ridge HOA, had knowingly filed fraudulent documents with the county assessor's office, committed criminal trespass on private land, and attempted to extort the property owner into surrendering jurisdictional control, all while falsely claiming municipal authority. Then they called witnesses. One after another, residents of Silver Bluff Ridge testified, some reluctantly, some with visible anger, about Karen's reign. A young couple told the court how they'd been fined over $500 for having non-conforming shutters. An elderly man described being told he couldn't install a wheelchair ramp because it violated visual cohesion standards. A teacher recounted being advised to remove books from her home's little free library because they didn't align with HOA community messaging. It painted a picture all right, not just of Karen's overreach, but of a long-standing abuse of power disguised as neighborhood management. And then it was my turn again. I took the stand for the second time, this time armed with more than just maps and documentation. I had footage from my trail cam, infrared shots from the night Karen and her stooges crept in again after their arrest. I'd left a cam hidden in an old fence post. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to show the three of them documenting enough non-compliance violations to justify emergency seizure authority. I could see the color drain from Karen's face when it played. Her lawyer tried to object on the basis of unauthorized surveillance. The judge overruled it immediately. Next came Morales, cool, methodical, and armed with every page of notarized evidence. He walked the jury through the doctored maps, the voice memo from the former admin, the metadata from emails showing Karen instructing her board to relabel private plots as community assets to expedite jurisdiction. But the coup de grace came when he played a recorded phone call, one that Karen had made to the HOA's insurance provider 2 days before her arrest. She'd said, and I quote, "It's only one ranch. He's old school. He won't fight if we say it's a clerical thing. We just move the markers and tell him the board already voted." That was the moment it stopped being a nuisance case. It became strategy, coordinated malicious fraud. The jury didn't take long. After a 2-day trial and just 3 hours of deliberation, the verdict came in. Guilty on all counts. Karen Schelling, guilty of criminal trespass, fraudulent filing of official documents, attempted coercion, and conspiracy to unlawfully acquire private property. Her sentence? 11 years, with eligibility for parole after 6. The 2 board members got 7 and 4 years, respectively. Both pleaded down to conspiracy and trespass. The plea deals required them to give full statements, which they did, throwing Karen under the bus so fast she didn't even see the license plate. Then came the ruling on Silver Bluff Ridge HOA itself, stripped of its corporate status. Fined $900,000 for administrative violations and fraudulent land claims. Board disbanded, licenses revoked, assets frozen. It was the legal version of turning a plastic empire into dust. When the judge read the final order, I didn't smile. Not out of humility, but because I was too damn tired. Months of paperwork, late nights, phone calls, evidence logs, trail cams, pressure, stress. And it had finally broken. The system had for once worked. Outside the courthouse, I found Morales leaning on a lamppost, looking like a man who'd finally cleaned up the last dish after a 5-hour dinner party. "You made this case airtight," he said. I just didn't stop. That's the trick, isn't it? The press tried to get a statement. I gave them this. If you let someone redraw your boundaries once, they'll keep redrawing you right off your own land. That was all they needed. A month after the verdict, the land finally felt quiet again. Not the uneasy kind of quiet I'd grown used to during the worst of the HOA's games, but the old kind. The kind you earn. The snow was light that year, just enough to frost the high ridgelines in the mornings and give the cattle a reason to huddle close to the eastern fences. I'd gotten back into my daily rounds, boots on earth, map under arm, pen behind the ear. Just the way I liked it. Repairs were slow but steady. That back gate they broke, welded new hinges onto it, reinforced the post with rebar sunk 5 feet deep. The barn they tried to claim? I restored the south panel and repainted the roof in a deep, defiant red. A neighbor from town came up to help me sandblast the old HOAVIOLATION, marks someone had scrawled in chalk weeks back. We laughed the whole time. He wasn't even a close friend, just someone who'd read about the case in the Gazette and decided to come shake the hand of a man who doesn't back down. The DA's office finalized the asset forfeiture ruling against the HOA. Morales called me personally. "You're clear," he said. "All filings, all claims, all jurisdictional attempts wiped clean. The county's issuing you a certified notice of non-affiliation." He paused, then added, "You're also entitled to civil compensation if you want it." I hadn't planned to sue, but I thought about that busted fence, the time lost, the mental toll of always watching my land like it was a battlefield. So I filed. The county awarded me $180,000 in compensatory damages for unlawful interference with property, stress, repairs, and legal costs. It wasn't about the money, but I made damn sure to use part of it well. I commissioned a local blacksmith to craft a series of engraved steel signs. We bolted them along the full length of the southern boundary. Each one read, This land will never belong to HOA. 3/8-inch plate steel, weatherproof, mounted in concrete footings, one every 200 feet. Word spread. Other ranchers, even homeowners, started calling me. Not just to congratulate, but to ask for advice. Turns out Karen wasn't the only HOA president with delusions of empire. I helped where I could, shared documents, explained boundaries, showed them how to document properly, how to keep their land sovereign. One guy even invited me to speak at a small town meeting up near Elko. I didn't do speeches, but I went, just to stand in the back and watch people realize they didn't have to get steamrolled. As for Silver Bluff Ridge, the developer sold off the remaining lots. The board never reformed. A few homeowners petitioned to dissolve the HOA entirely, and when the dust cleared, most of the residents voted to return to individual landholder agreements. Imagine that, people trusting neighbors over rulebooks. Karen? She's still inside. Her appeal was denied. I heard she got moved to a minimum security facility somewhere south of Vegas. Teaches etiquette classes, if the rumors are true. I suppose even she found a boundary she couldn't bulldoze. One morning, I went up the ridge with my sketch pad, sat under the old juniper tree with a cup of coffee, and drew the outline of my land again, just like I did the first day I bought it. No HOA lines, no fake overlays, no fraudulent perimeters. Just hills, gullies, creeks, trails, and fences I built with my own hands. And silence. The good kind.